We're very excited. This is our second teaching and learning talk for the fall semester. We're very happy today to have a guest speaker, Ben Wiggins. I'll tell you a little bit about him. His talk today is going to be deeper thought and less anxiety using the public exam system. Ben is the instructional manager for the biology department at University of Washington. He also holds a PhD in the learning sciences. He teaches small classes to ginormous ones, I think up to 800 students in some of your biology courses. His NSF-funded research focuses on assessment strategies and training instructors to apply those techniques to his courses, often very large classes. And he is a product of an Oregon and Washington University education, which makes him a Husky duck by my calculation. I first became aware of Ben and his work with public exams during a large remote conference this summer. I got to be honest, I went to it with a little bit of skepticism when I saw public exams. I didn't know what to make of it. And Ben gave his talk to, it turns out, a huge audience. It was kind of shielded from us by the people who conducted the session, but I think he had north of 600. Was it, Ben? Do you remember how many folks you had?
Yeah, somewhere around 800. Yeah,
800. And I've never seen such an active chat line in a remote session. Overwhelmingly positive, lots of questions going back and forth. People were really, it was a very timely topic. I think that COVID in particular has made assessment, especially formative assessment, much more critical in being sort of systematic about deploying it correctly. So with that said, Ben, I'm going to turn it over to you. I'm going to stop sharing and you can start.
Awesome. We'll check out all the technology here. I hope people in the room and on Zoom can hear me.
Yes.
Hitting thumbs up. Excellent. I need to find the PowerPoint. There it is. So I think you can see my slides now. That's the second of 3 checks. Great. And poll everywhere at Ben Wiggins. There's a poll up for you now if you want to give me some information about yourself. I have done this kind of mixed Zoom and in person before. I saw it first, I think in 1987 on a Star Trek, but now we're actually doing it. So it's really great to be here. Pablo, thank you for that really kind introduction. This would not be possible without technology. So even thank you to Zoom. I'll jump right into trying to tell you a little bit about how we think about assessments. And then we'll do something of a mixed research talk and implementation talk, how you actually do these kind of exams. Okay, so our lens on assessment. Now, we're coming into this thinking about lots of different kinds of decisions that you make about exams. If you have not watched the video from Drs. Haufer and Barger from the last session in September, it is a wonderful opening of all of the different ways that you can think about assessment. And we're really aligned in how we think about wanting assessments to be primarily useful for learning. But there's lots of things you have to think about. So what style of exam are you going to use? If we back up a couple of decades, you have 2 choices. You can do traditional exams, which we've been calling surprise exams because students walk into the room, get a piece of paper, and then try to take on those challenges in the moment. Or you can do take-home exams. And more recently, there are some other styles. I will leave these in the links. Different styles for how to format your exam in ways that go for one or another benefit. We're adding public exams to the list, and obviously I'm going to be focusing on that. But that's not the only decision you have to make. You have a huge number of logistics in your exams, and those logistics control a lot of how you can engage your students. So the number of students that you're talking to, anything we talk about, if it doesn't scale up to 700 people in a room, it's a little bit weaker. So we're only going to talk about methods today that do work at scale. And then there's everything else you have to think about logistically. I do not need to tell a bunch of professors how many constraints you are under in terms of time, the other things you need to do, and trying to get this document to actually work. Once you do, you're also probably thinking about how your exam is going to be judged. So not just do students like it or not, but is it backed by the literature? Will it pass your collegial review or your tenure review? How are students going to talk about you in person, to their peers, online? There's just lots of different ways to think about judging what an exam is. And that doesn't even get us to talking about what your goals are. And I hope this list is starting to feel overwhelming, because it really is. For professors writing exams, this is a huge set of complicated challenges. The ways that we come at these challenges are that we're going to talk about public exams, but maybe more importantly, in terms of logistics, we want to give professors a tool that is flexible, that you can use in small scale, in large scale, with big rooms, with small rooms, that you can use in different languages. So hopefully we've tested this enough that it can transfer into your room and you won't be stuck on any particular constraint. We want this to pass a broad scale quality review. So regardless of which stakeholder in the exam is looking at it, they'll say, oh, right, we can see that this is quality. And our particular goals are increasing the number of learning opportunities. So the number of times that students can engage with the material, increasing the equity of those engagements so that all students have the opportunity to really engage deeply with the material. And then especially, and I really like the comments from the first STLI session that I saw, thinking about transparency. Can students understand why they are being tested in a particular way? With that as our lens, I will pause to see if there's any questions in the chat or any hands up.
It won't go higher.
And seeing none, I'll introduce the research team. So I'm the talking head for today, but I'm here to represent 10 odd people who are working on public exam research. So we're spread across a number of different institutions, mostly in the Pacific Northwest, though not all. And then I'm here, as Pablo said, because I teach really large and really small courses. A number of my research projects from my PhD's in education, but my master's was in molecular biology. So biologists, hey, I understand like a third of what you talk about now. And here's some links if you want to cyberstalk me. My work is mostly funded by the NSF, but the public exam research work that you're going to hear about today is, and this was an interesting one for us, is actually funded by an edtech.com. So Course Hero, you have undoubtedly heard of in your large classes as somebody helping students to either understand your exams or to find nuanced and potentially morally conflicted ways to think about your exams. Course Hero wants to do some good in the world, and the way they have figured out to do that is to give us some money. So fingers crossed that's paying off for them. So I have introduced myself, how we think about exams. Let's dive into what a public exam actually is. So the core problems that we have had, and we have struggled with this for decades, I'm going to show you 4 problems. One is that students, and not just a student a year, but dozens and hundreds of students express some level of feeling tricked by the exam wording or the format. It's not the content that's holding them back from higher scores, at least in their perceptions. It's the trickiness. That's one struggle. Another struggle is that novice learners are getting a massive onslaught of information, and we need to pinpoint what are the core features. For novice learners, everything is just a fact, and we want to show them what the deep concepts are. That's easier said than done. Our third problem is that low-level questioning is often the result of constraints. We have a small time period. We have a paper-based surprise exam. We're often, especially in large classes, limited to pretty low-level questions, and we would like to deepen the learning. And then lastly, students don't trust us. They know that this piece of paper shows up in front of them at a crucial moment in their development. For some, the most important part of their education up to that point in their life, and they don't know where it's from, and they don't understand how it's graded, and they just feel the negative impacts afterwards. Okay, turns out we are not the only ones struggling with these. If nobody in this room is struggling with any of these, I just envy you. That's fantastic. So what we want to do to help with each of these is, first, we want to help students overcome language barriers. Now, that is not necessarily from students who are multilingual learning jargon in the particular discipline, but sometimes it's just how I talk doesn't translate well to explicit challenges. So we want to find a way to get students around the trickiness. I'm going to throw some links here about places in the literature where people have really highlighted these particular problems that made us feel better that we weren't the only ones. Directing students to the core concepts of the field is a key part of deliberate practice, which is a theory of learning that shows that this is a widespread problem. How do students know, or really learners of any kind, know how to focus on the most important pieces? Third in the series, educative assessment is the broader theory that says that exams should help learning, and we want that learning to be not just producing memorizing machines, but students who can go out and do work in fields that we don't even know are fields yet. If we can do these things, then we would like to also include students in that process, where possible, bringing them into the authentic practice of making assessments, bringing them at least to an understanding of how we're going about our job, will hopefully engender trust and will let students feel more a part of their education. It's not just a thing they're paying big checks to. It's a thing that they understand and they feel that they have some influence on. Okay, so my question for you, if you've understood these, is, let me activate that. So on Poll Everywhere, which of these 4 problems for the exams that you have either taken, heard of, or are actively writing, do you think is the most meaningful for your students? I'm seeing results come in, so it's at least theoretically possible to enter here. And I'll give you 20 seconds or so to think of which one is most impactful for you.
Ben, can you share or pollev.com/Ben Wiggins? If you have a mobile device, you should be able to answer that and participate. Sorry, Ben. We should have thought of that and put it up. I think once people get in, was everybody that can able to get in? Excellent. Okay, we'll move on.
Yeah, I've got a bunch of responses. This is at least a sampling of the room. And if we were a representative sample of the entire academia, we would be saying that all of these are relevant, but it looks like this group is focused mostly on helping to guide students to the really core concepts of the material and deepening the level of cognitive thought going in. People around the world, around the country, are going to have slightly different versions of these problems and different problems, but it looks like those are what we, the Zoom plus Room plus My Office group, are focused on. Okay, so here's what we built to try to work on this. Oh, sorry, this is a reminder for myself. Everything I just said is fine and good. That is a very student-facing lens. Everything we've talked about is for their experience, but they are not the only stakeholders here. We have to create exam methods that are usable by real human faculty who have real human lives. So these have to work for actual faculty. And if we're going to sustainably implement public exams anywhere, they have to be relatively easy, relatively simple, cheap, and I think the last one's probably the most important. You have to be able to do a little, see some positive results, and then do a little more. If I ask you at the end of this talk to consider public exams, I am not going to ask you to throw away all of the other things you do in your life and take on 100 more hours of exam writing. That just doesn't work for real humans. But I think you'll see that at least some of these methods are dirt simple. Okay, so here's what a public exam looks like. Traditionally, you could think of a surprise exam as being a number of days leading up to a final challenge. So we have that red box there, that's the exam. And there are some things before that exam that students can see and some things that are secret from them. So the top is the things that are transparent, bottom are more secret. And so you spend all your time in secret doing the development and editing. And in parallel, but not as linked as you might think, students are studying and doing review sessions. So hopefully they are preparing for this exam. I have said that they are preparing for this exam 4 days ahead of time. Our mileage may vary on that. This is a traditional exam. What we're doing with public exams looks a little bit like this. I'll leave the traditional up in the corner for comparison. In a public exam, we write a partial version of the exam and we write it well ahead. In fact, for many parts of the exam, we're going to write this exam before students have contacted the material. Then that public exam, which is about 70% of the exams in terms of total words or images or information, is made available to students. It is published on a website. Students know where to get it. We direct them to it. During that time, we often ask students explicitly in a survey or in a small assignment to give edits, or at least have the opportunity to tell us what they think about the exam. And then we use those student edits to improve a second version, which is again published for those students. Now, there's some secret part to this, because to put in the last little bit of any question, I have to do that secretly. Otherwise, everybody knows all the questions and they can figure out the answers before they walk in. But that's a lot less. And now student review sessions can happen much earlier because they have authentic things to study from. We think this structure helps for 4 reasons. The language is improved because students tell us what's wrong with the language. So if I have an 800 student class, I show up after publishing the 1.0 and I have 300 students giving me edits. And of those, 50 might say, this word on question 6 makes no sense. Now I'm not meeting that during the exam when it's too late to fix it. And we're kind of just saying into the microphone, do your best. We can really make changes. And a lot of the times these wording differences are not technical language. They're what we think of as common English, and I've just used it wrong. Secondly, we're giving students our most authentic, most direct sense of what is important. They can actually look at the exam on which they are paid in points and see what core concepts are in there. Now, you can do this with study guides, you can do this with practice exams, and all of those are good yet indirect to the actual mode in which they are earning points. We think this might be a little bit better because it is the physical document they are going to see. Lastly, we give them a lot more time to think. Because we can present information a lot longer in advance, we can give deeper information for students to study. I'll give you some examples here in a few minutes. Lastly, because so much more of this process is transparent to students, they watch an exam be built. Now, a few students will suggest edits, see their edits incorporated, and have a very direct experience of having influenced the exam. More students will at least know that that's possible. If you are interested in a very dry, very long description of all the nuts and bolts of how to do this, I'll leave this link in here. But what I'd like to do here is pause for questions, chat in person, speak up, whatever you'd like to do, and see if we're on the same page for at least the structure, and then we'll go into some specific examples.
Let's start with the room, and then if anybody has questions, well, I think, let's start here.
So, hi, it's a very interesting idea, but I'm a little uncertain what exactly is graded. So what part of the exam students haven't seen, and what part they can be familiar and prepared for?
This is a great question. I'm going to give some examples so it will be more clear in about 5 minutes, but this is graded just like any other exam. They're going to either come into class or do it online. They're going to have a discrete performance time, and you're going to get a document from them that you can grade in whatever way you graded last year. You grade public exams, well, sorry, maybe not last year, but in whatever way you grade public exams in the exact same way. What's changing really is the preparation for that performance. Yeah, I know that's a partial answer. I'll show you some examples in a couple minutes. Is that okay?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, great.
And we have one on chat. I don't know if you see it. Do you have questions that may not make it to the exam?
Oh, this is a good one. You can, in a public exam format, it is perfectly possible to say the question on the exam is one of these three questions. And so you're directing students to know these three are explicitly important. There's some variability in what they're going to show up and actually do, but really motivated students could go and write out answers to all three. They could do study groups and talk about all three of those. If you already do that in your exams and you're thinking, wait, is Ben and his group taking credit for something I've been doing for 20 years? Yes. All of these methods have been explicitly used widely across K-12. There's somebody doing all of these things on every campus in America. We're really just trying to put them together in a useful way. There is nothing new under the sun in education.
Ben, we've got a question from Alejandro, and if anybody wants to speak up, we'll be able to hear. Everybody should be able to hear, but Alejandro asked, does this create a bias towards students just focusing on certain information that is tested in the exam? So the converse would be, do they ignore stuff that they think is not going to be in the exam?
Yes, Alejandro, this is a great point. Explicitly, yes, we are telling them what is important. So if you are, let's see an example. If you do not have control of the exams, the exam questions on which you're testing, like let's say your class then goes towards some kind of standardized test or professional school licensing test, this may not be the best method to use. But you, as the professor in your room, you know what's most important. And you can push your students that way. We are asking people very explicitly to teach to the test. And just like Grant Wiggins wrote 30 years ago, no relation, a genius in the field, that teaching to the test should be a good thing. And when we control our test, if I can pull out of each of your professor brains what you think is deeply important to the field, and we can put that on the test, we want that public for students. Now, teaching to the test has a very bad name in lots of educational environments when tests are delivered top down from somebody removed. So nationwide standardized testing, the testing has no relevance necessarily for what an individual person in that locale with those students thinks is important for them. So when they teach to this test, they're not teaching what they think is important, they're teaching to get some points. In higher education, we generally have the opportunity to go beyond that. So in some environments, I'd say teaching the test is a problem. Here, I think it's one of our greatest tools for learning. And can I go to Patricia's question?
Yeah.
Patricia, this is a great question. The final version of the exam.
Oh, can you repeat it? Repeat it for the folks here.
Yeah, using this structure, the final version of the exam contains 30% unseen questions. What I mean by 30% is a chunk of each question is held back. You can do some totally surprise questions if you want. It's your classroom. But what we do is we give most of questions. Is it okay if I jump in and show you that?
I think that would be a good spot to jump into the details of how this is built.
Okay, let's do it. Here is a version of a traditional exam. So I don't know how many people are naval military historians in this room. I chose an example that is for which there are professors infrequently in my talk so that we are all equally out to lunch here. I'll give you 20 seconds to read this question because that's about how long we give students on exams to read each of our questions. Read this and then we'll talk about it. Now I'm lucky enough to be talking to a bunch of academics here. So everybody is probably in your competitive brains trying to form your answer. But let me just point out what we're trying to do here. This is a traditional exam. So we've presented some information and we've asked for an output. I do not know enough naval military history to know if A, B, C, D, E are things that they've memorized from what they've heard in class, or maybe that takes a bit of deeper thought. And in question 2, they get a chance to explain something. So there's nothing wrong with this question. But we do think we can do better. So here's the same topic, but treated in a public exam version. So click with me here. So here's a really similar question. We're going to give a bunch of data, way too much data in this diagram to possibly take in the minute or 3 minutes that you have in a high pressure exam. We've given 4 questions, of which you'll notice in questions 1, 2, and 3, part of it is withheld. Now, Patricia, I said 30%, and here you can see that the withheld is clearly a lot less than 30%. But those pieces, those few words in the withheld brackets, make all the difference. Now students can have a week or 10 days to really understand this. I think, as professor of this naval military history course, that Trafalgar is the most important battle they should understand. The concepts are here. So I'm saying, dive into this. Put it up on the wall in your study groups. Start playing with things. Talk about the different ships. What are they doing? Why are they there? What are the problems? And I think the use of wind and prevailing wind direction in naval tactics is crucial. So it's explicitly in question 4. They don't know what they're going to answer, but they know that that is a core concept for what they're doing. Just to highlight those in pretty boxes, here's the framing. Here's the data that they're going to analyze, and data in everyone's field is different. Here's the structure of the hidden data. They don't know what that information is, but they at least know where they're going to find it. And lastly, here is the actual question test. So they don't have to spend hours and hours memorizing tons of facts. They can get into the next level of what are the important concepts. So what I'm going to do now is just jump one more slide into the future and look at what they see on the exam. When they come into the room, you'll see that almost nothing has changed. The only thing is that now in question 1, I'm asking about which French ships in this are most likely to be damaged or to escape. Not which historically did, but given this diagram, which were most likely to take that attack or avoid it. And which English ship is most crucial to this attack? Is there a right answer? It turns out there is not one right answer. But a student could argue that in question 4 in a number of ways that show that they understand the concepts. That's a lot of talking from me. Let me pause here and see if there are questions about this example. I have one more example for you afterwards. Yeah, Aaron, can I jump over to you?
Thanks. Yeah. So I think that the way this works is that students in their preparation, like with study groups, they would have the public exam to look at so they could talk things through. And so I'm wondering if that, maybe this is the point of it, but it seems like there's more value in a good study group here because you have more information, right? You can get closer to getting the answer, even though you can't write an answer ahead of time with your partners because you don't know exactly what's going to be asked. So it seems like maybe it provides an advantage, I don't know, to more social people, more popular people, something like that, where in the surprise exam format, your study group isn't as valuable because you don't know what you're ultimately going to have to do.
That's really well said. I do not have direct research to speak to the value or the particular people that find value in it. What I can tell you anecdotally as a professor, having done lots of these, is that when students come to my office hours, I have essentially stopped getting the student walks in the office hour, sits down and goes, what should I know? And before they would walk in and they would say, I don't really understand what's going on this week. Can you explain it again? And now they say, I don't really understand what's going on this week. I would have thought that the northernmost column would really have a higher degree or a higher angle of impact with the French column. And so that would have really put a lot of pressure on the back ships in the French column. So I don't understand anything. Can you tell me about it? And the reality is they are revealing, first, they know a lot. And second, they're diving into the real core of the material. That's anecdotally, right? Everybody's mileage may vary. But if you're trying to get students thinking more deeply, this may be a way.
And we have a question from Leslie.
Yeah.
Which is, what is the difference in impact between writing a public exam per se and just making the questions on the exam the same type and wording as all of the in-class exercises and take-home assignments?
Leslie, this is a great question. So I said there were 4 reasons, or we're trying to design for 4 parts of public exams. Your solution solves the wording issue, and that students get to contact it, but they can't give, I guess they could give comments. Okay, solves that issue. Does it tell them what the core concepts are? Your solution does that. Does it get them thinking more deeply? Yeah, you have an opportunity to give them some data to study on, although maybe it's not the exact same data. And does it help them trust you? Yes, some. Now, the place where public exams may be superior, which is a small bit, because your solution works. There's no question about that. The public exam format may save time overall, and it may decrease anxiety because it's the actual exam document. We didn't start this research looking for anxiety issues. Those came up, and I'll tell you about that in a few minutes, but they have hit home for us as a major advantage. And students tell us the practice questions, I don't know what the exam's going to look like, so there's anxiety there. But when we give them a thing that we are calling a version of the exam, even if there's not a lot of difference between those, they're walking in a class with a lot less cognitive load, with a lot less anxiety about the process. Leslie, if you were asking me if your method works, I think 100% your method works. If Grant Wiggins walked in right now, he would say, that's awesome. I don't have any research about your method, though. I have some research about ours. Awesome. Thank you. Let's follow up with that in a second. I'm going to very quickly now go through one more example. This is an art example. We could be asking students to, in this example, we would give the public version here to students and say, you're going to try to show us the kinds of lines that are important in both of these pieces. We'll show you one piece, but not the other. As you are probably figuring out, this gives us a couple of opportunities here. So if we show them the second example, now some parts of the answer are knowable before the exam, and other parts they're going to have to figure out during or in the moment of their performance. Students can generate their own study examples. So they could put up the Jericho piece on the left and then any number of paintings on the right and try this. So they don't have to be reliant on us for practice material. And then lastly, this gives them a chance to tell us about wording. In this particular example, I thought that bolded line read fine. That makes all the sense in the world to me. But students very reliably, like many students said the same thing of using dashed lines to indicate those 5 words did not make sense. I don't know why they didn't make sense. A linguist could tell me more. But many students suggested something like, identify their locations with. I think the gerund of using is generally complicated, and I wouldn't have known that, but our wording got better because we presented it for students. And that was then not a thing that we have to worry about in class. In practice, we get very few questions during the actual exam because most of the wording is either ironed out, they've had practice, or ironed out, they've had a little bit of input. Those are the two. Yeah, go for
Ben,
it.
did you go the extra mile? When Ben and I first discussed this, he had a bunch of STEMmy bio questions with sort of Gattaca type questions. Did you go the extra mile and get rid of all the STEMmy stuff?
I did. I love molecular biology. I think everyone in the room should know that an A to T mutation is one of the most interesting things in the world, but I accept that my perspective is not universally shared.
But I think that this is the perfect moment to have my interlude where we have a teaser for tomorrow. So So Ben, tomorrow from 2:30 to 4, if you didn't see it, if you weren't quite sure, you can still sign up for tomorrow. We'll be meeting in this room, and we'll be sort of working through how you might try to apply this in your own classes. So that was a shill for tomorrow, Ben.
Yeah, thank you.
But
You've
if
given
it's
me.
possible to show a STEM-related example, that would be great.
Let's do it. Pretend you don't see any of this research data to back up what we're doing. And let me jump forward. Nope, you're not even looking at the significance. You're not reading the summary. Let's see if we can find some things that I have formatted similarly so that they're easy to engage with after we just did those. Here's a totally reasonable traditional example. So we're giving a wild type RNA sequence. Some of you have some of this in your body. And sequence D is some other sequence. I've highlighted a couple of changes, and there's a multiple choice question. So you can say, what kind of mutation is it? And explain why. There is nothing wrong with this question. There's nothing wrong with any exam question. But we think we can do a little bit better. So I'm going quickly, but for the biologists in the back, here's a public treatment of the same thing. So here's the wild type sequence, sequence D, and then sequence E and F they will get during the exam. Whatever shows up in E and F, they're going to have to tell us which of D, E, and F is going to make the most likely to be a functional protein, similar to the wild type, the least likely to be functional like the wild type, and then explain why their answer in question 1 is that. The result of this question is that every whiteboard in our entire building is full of random RNA sequence and students making changes and translating things and showing up with protein sequences and saying, did we get this right? Do we have some instinct for the protein? I don't know who asked the question about seeing a STEM example, but does this help a little bit? And then Inga, let's get to your question second.
Thank you.
Awesome. Inga, great question. You could use this and give exactly this question and every year do something similar. Yeah.
Inga asked, one of the things I like about this is that you could use the same public exam every year and still have every final exam be new.
Using this question in subsequent years, all you have to do is make a new sequence E and F. If you want to change the wild type, you can. But the structure is there. And students, importantly, if students in, let's say, their Greek system have a vat of exams, and so they can look through all the old exams, they don't get an advantage from that because everyone can generate as much practice material as they want. And it's not the same answers each year.
And then Ben Alejandro asked, can you speak of possible scenarios where public exams perform poorly?
Yeah, I have 2 where public exams perform really poorly. 1, there are classes where it is important to do a ton of low-level memorization type learning. That is very important in some environments. In some places, that is the point. We have a plant identification class here at the University of Washington. To teach that at a deeper conceptual level would be missing the point. We need students to walk out of that class knowing which plants they're looking at. Public exams don't help that because you're not trying to deepen the learning. 2 is there are many, many teaching environments where the depth of the exam is already so strong. One example is that in many law schools, the Socratic traditional method in law school really lends itself to deep engagement with conceptual understanding. To throw that away for a public exam system would be silly. Keep doing what you're doing if you already have your own method for this. And actually, I hope my research that I'm going to show you in the next 10 minutes or so applies to that and convinces you that those other deep methods are also probably helping students.
And I think let's take one more.
Yeah.
And the answer to this might be come tomorrow, Patricia, to Friday's workshop. Can you speak to the grading process of this exam for large 400 plus lecture courses?
Yeah, Patricia, that's a great question. One of the nice things about this style is that students have more time to read all the formatting. So in a surprise exam, you might have to say something like, explain your answer to this. And so then if you're going to read 400 of these, you need to read everyone's explanation. But we can ask for more precise formatting for students. We can say, you're going to come into this room and you're going to tell us which of these three concepts you're trying to answer. You're going to code it so that your first sentence is exactly, I am trying to answer this, and I am answering in the positive. Makes it faster to grade. And then you can grade the harder part a little bit more efficiently. You can, because you have the opportunity to write out more of that coding, students can encode their information for you a little bit more easily. So we think it can help. It at least doesn't make it any worse than it already is. And if you're grading 400 exams on your own, you already know how bad that is. Okay, I hope that addressed that question enough. Okay, perfect. Thanks, Patricia. Let me jump into a brief overview of some of the research. We thought this was important, but we don't think that we're smart as researchers. Some of us are qualitative researchers, so we know that the right question is probably not the question we're thinking about right from the start. So we started by asking lots of students to talk to us. We did a bunch of interviews across multiple institutions, and we coded those interview transcripts, asking students broadly, what do you think? Not pointing them in any direction. And we coded those for the 4 themes we were looking for. Now, I'm going to throw a bunch of quotes up here, and in the notes, I'm going to give you even more if you want to follow up on some of the specific things students said, but we're not going to sit here and read a bunch of quotes. So you can ignore column 3 if you'd like. But what students came back with, and this was generated in a grounded theory kind of way, is that they said, yeah, we think those 4 things are important, but you're forgetting collaboration. This really matters because, just like Aaron was mentioning, how this makes us work with other people and how this changes the values of that. So collaboration was not on our list, but students put it there. And then anxiety was not on our list, and students put it there. Later in a more quantitative sense, we're going to go searching for all 6 of these themes. So I apologize, but ignore these quotes for now. And let's use what we know and think about how students feel about public exam questions. We gave, in a 300 student class, we gave them 2 public exam questions on, 2 exams on which there were public exam questions and some traditional surprise questions. So it was a 15-10 split. After those exams, we asked them how they felt. And this experiment controls for the students, the content, the student-instructor relationship, the time during the course, and the fact that it was spring 2021. So we asked them to tell us what they thought. Do you want to keep the 15-10 ratio? Do you want more secret questions or more public questions? If I were a good active learning advocate right now, I would let you talk to your neighbor and think about what your answers might be. But instead, I'm just in researcher mode. So here's what they said. About 40% were fine with the same ratio. And then by a huge ratio, students wanted more public questions after having had a couple of the exams than they wanted secret questions. But that's just one poll. So what we did is we try as practitioners to listen to our students, so we increased it. All right, you get 20 public and 5 secret. Let's ask the same question again. And students here, you would expect their information to change and their decisions to change. Here, about 2/3 of the class was very comfortable with that ratio. And by a 4-to-1 margin, students said that they would prefer more public questions as opposed to more traditional questions. Lastly, we kept that 20-to-5 ratio. We felt like this is a reasonable balance point. But for this last question, we said, okay, no more waffling. If you had to increase the number of traditional questions or increase the number of public questions, what would you do? And this is what we saw. So my question for you is, and I'll activate this now, it's up on the poll everywhere. Looking at this data, if you had to judge and this is all the information you had, what would you say this tells us about student feelings about public exam questions overall? This group is clearly poll everywhere experts. Answers are rolling in. I'll give you about 10 more seconds. Okay. Your group and our group have similar conclusions here. This is somewhere between fairly strong evidence for a desire for more public style questions and reasonably strong evidence. It's probably not students telling us that they hate this stuff. This is just student self-reported experience. So it's only one kind of data that we want to look at. What we thought was more important was looking at the actual outcomes for students. Interviews are really hard. They take a lot of time. So to get a lot more data, we asked every student that we work with, hey, how's the exam working for you? And we gave them a participation-only opportunity to write some comments about it. This was not directed towards the public exam. It was much more broadly, how's the process of accumulating exam points working for you in this class? It's a pretty basic question. Did the style of exams in this course work for you? Students wrote us lots of answers. And so we blind coded those between multiple different institutions. We were scoring for thoughts, not saying a person likes public exam, but one statement. How is it affecting each of our codes? They were graded for engaging in this, but not for what their responses were. Clearly, we don't want them thinking that they're on the hook to tell us it's a good thing. And we coded these for positive or negative outcomes. Let me show you that. Here are our codes, the 4 we started with and the 2 that came up from interviews. If a student said, I felt like I had some say in my own exam, we would code this as, great, this looks like it's somehow related to authentic involvement. And this seems like a positive outcome for learning. Based on what we know from educational best practices, we would label that as a positive. Similarly, you can probably guess, if a student said, the public exam made it harder to know what I needed to know, that's the category of directing to core concepts, and that's a bad thing for learning. But I want to underline this point of being for learning, because some students would say something like this. I hate public exams because they force me to think more deeply. We have the same students. We would think about this in the concept of deeper thought, and we would code this as a positive. We're not here to tell what students like. We're trying to make inroads into what is actually helping their learning experience or not. And similarly, here's something that doesn't have an impact on something in the public exam system. So they may really dislike the problems with their internet connection. That's a negative, and we would code that as everything else. So there's tons of comments that students made that didn't fit into any of our specific codes. And that's going to be important in just a minute, because what we want to do is we want to say, are any of these codes significant in student experiences? And if they are they for good or bad? Now, what we could do is we could compare each code, and we could say that, well, we're going to make a naive economic model that humans are going to report good things and bad things equally. But that's not how actual humans work. They're generally more likely to report on a survey things are good, at least on these surveys. So we thought using a 1-to-1 ratio would be overly optimistic for our chances of finding significance. So instead, we used the not public exam system codes as our null hypothesis. So they were about 2-to-1 in positive. And the rest of the stats that I'm going to show you are using that as the comparison group. And it's nice because we can compare the same people and see how positive or negative they are in general. That's an important statistical piece. It is the only statistics that are complicated at all in this whole talk. But let me pause there. Are there any thoughts there? Ooh, and Adam, great question. Let me get to that after I make sure the statistics make reasonable sense. I look really closely to see any hands.
I think we're all good in the room.
Awesome. This is generally what happens when I, a very, very non-statistician, talk to people who are savvy about this stuff. They say, yeah, get on with it. Adam asked about the conception of the word secret. In our polls, we use the word traditional. Secret is our shorthand, but students weren't seeing that. Does that help a little bit, Adam?
Yes, thank you very much.
Okay, awesome.
Oh,
So
thank
here
you,
are
Adam.
results.
I always love it when the remote people speak up instead of just use the chat. Feel free to unmute yourself if you want to jump in.
Right on. So you ready for the results already? Here's what we found. For the overall impacts of public exams across lots and lots of student comments and taking codes that have been validated through deeper interviews, we found that overall public exams are strongly positive and strongly significant. We think this is overall saying that public exams are somehow helping the learning experience of these students. We have a large enough cohort that we're not just looking at data from 20 students at the top of the class. This is the whole really large class, or pretty close to it based on our IRB consent procedure. So language barriers was an issue for us. It was an issue in interviews, but it did not show up as significant in larger student experiences. Authentic involvement, again, did not show up. It's a generally positive ratio, but not significant to the point that we would report it. Collaboration, which came out of student comments, I would love to be able to tell you that it then triangulated to other ways of looking at student experiences, but it did not. It's just too small a sample size for those particular comments. So none of those three are significant. But where this gets interesting is that students were strongly reporting positive learning experiences because of directing to core concepts. So that ratio of 55 to 5, anecdotally, that's as strong a signal as I've ever seen in any qualitative work. In deeper thought, we also saw a significant and significantly positive impact. And for improving issues of anxiety, we also saw a positive and significant impact. Now we went back, and there's a couple of different ways that we have combed through this data. There's a whole data set I'm not showing you because we're really worried that if we're good in these areas, but those goods are inequitable, it kind of invalidates everything that we're doing. So we also went back and looked to see if there were differences for our minoritized groups, and those differences do not manifest. So we feel good about that. If we have time today, I can show you a deeper look into the equity of these situations. We think the summary then is that overall public exams are positively impacting the student learning experience, and that's mostly coming from directing to core concepts, doing deeper cognitive work, and having less anxiety. It will take roughly 3 NSF grants to get all the way to the bottom of all of those questions. So we're a long way from that, but I am glad to be able to report some of these things to you.
One of the things that's characteristic about STEM courses is that they're often done in sequence where a second course builds on the first. Do you have any response from the people teaching the course after these to see whether or not they see a difference in the core learning of the students?
Yeah. Okay, this is super honesty time. People teaching the class after me generally comment that it is the quarter when their students are most rabid for deep answers. They expect their exams to be testing them on the deep stuff. They want problems to play with so they can get a chance to really dive into it. And they have a bit more resistance to low-level exam questions. That is purely anecdotally. I can also tell you that, let's see, at our institution, we've had 5 different faculty take up these methods, and we almost always push faculty to take up these methods at 1%. Just try it on 1 question a quarter. Give 1 scenario and ask a few questions for it. And it's a ratchet, because you give 1 deeper question in this way, you start to get better student feedback, and then those faculty always go forward with more in subsequent years. So we think it's a method that you can parcel out, and then once we get you hooked on a little bit of positive feedback, then there's that feedback loop is going to lead to more and more public style questions. That's going a bit beyond your question, but did that answer your question?
It started. I mean, it would be really nice if in future NSF grants you were to address that issue in particular, because certainly I'm a physics professor, so a lot of the courses we teach in the 2nd and 3rd year are really crucial to show that they've learned the material by the 4th year. And if we had a response like that from our faculty teaching the upper level courses, it would be a slam dunk to have this move done.
Yeah, that slam dunk sounds good to me. We'll keep working on it. I think I'm coming right up to time. So there's another small, less sure result about editing that I'll leave in the notes, but we probably just don't need to cover it today. And the summary is what you just heard. This is a low-tech, non-costly, pretty neutral effort way to give exams in the hands of people that are trying this in different fields around the country. They're reporting that once they get the hang of it, it's really pretty simple, and we think that the benefits are pretty meaningful. It doesn't appear to create or increase inequity in our classes. It works similarly across an R1 institution and a community college institution. So that's a start at looking about how it's going to broadly work for students in different places. And then we see an overall positive impact in deeper thought, better direction to core concepts, and less anxiety. That means that there's only 1,000 other questions to answer. And hopefully sometime in this lifetime, we'll get to a few of them. And I should end by just thanking a huge list of people. Course Hero took a chance on us. And then so many people have either contributed to doing public exams or trying them in their classrooms or giving feedback on some variation of this talk. You are included in that list. I appreciate the questions you've had. And if anybody wants to come back tomorrow and see about how to do it, I would love to work with you on your material and start to build that first question, because then I get my hooks in you.